Friends, we have with us Ananya Reddy, who got third rank in UPSC Civils 23. So, today's session, I want it to be specific to the mains answer writing. So, those candidates who are facing problems in the mains answer writing or strategy for the mains. Of course, I know that some of you score very good marks in the prelims, but repeatedly getting less marks in the mains. And Ananya, specifically, she has got very good marks in essay and general studies. Of course, optional also she got 275, which is a very good score. For GS, but GS we observe, she got 136 marks in essay writing, which is very high, almost like top 3 or 4. And ethics also 136. GS also GS1 109, GS2 120s, GS3 also 98, right? 98 is a good score this year. GS 98 is a very good score this year. So overall, every paper she has got a very good score, and she has her own strategy. Specifically, means she has not blindly followed strategy of a specific topper. Based on her preparation strategy, she has her own way of writing the answers. And even when I was discussing with her about the framework she made, mental frameworks for polity answers, economy, ethics, they're very unique. Very unique. Of course, they're simple, but very unique. So you can learn such things from her. See, you no need to learn knowledge of history or politics, not like that. Look at this session as how shall we plan answer writing of each subject, polity, economy, geography, history, ethics, essay writing, how shall we plan? What can you learn from her in making the framework for the answer, time management of the answer, and important areas. What important areas you have to focus, because time is less. By now, you have finished syllabus, most of you know, means who wrote the prelims. But for the mains, next 2.5 months, what you can do, you also focus on last 2 months also. Last 2 months, what you have done like that, okay? Okay, so without further delay, I'll hand it over to her and she'll start. So, Arani, will start with subject-wise, topic-wise. First, we'll finish. Initially, don't ask any questions. Let her finish her entire strategy for all subjects, all papers. After it is over, then let us start asking questions. So that, there will be continued in session. I suggest you to make notes also. Make notes because though it appears, as if you can remember, better to make notes. Okay. And one more thing, optional, let's keep separate. First, let her talk only about essay, general studies 1, 2, 3, 4. Once it is over, you ask doubts about general studies. Let us finish general studies. Then we'll think about optional. Then she will discuss optional. Because optional, most of you have different options. That's why maybe after GS is over, after doubts, based on the availability of time, we will start discussing about anthropology optional. Okay, Ananya? See.
So, good evening, everybody. So, like Sir has said, I'm Ananya, 8th this year. And a brief background about myself. I have done my graduation in geography from Miranda House, University of Delhi. And I've completed my graduation in the year 2021. Post that, I prepared for the examination for 2 full years. And then I gave my first attempt in 2023. And fortunately, I've been able to clear it in my first attempt. So, I've come to know that most of you sitting here are giving mains this year. Am I right? So, okay. So, is this your first mains or how many of you are giving mains for the first time? For the first time. Rest have given given mains before. Nobody has given mains before. Is this your first mains? Yes. Okay. So, yeah, how was prelims? How did you find the paper? What? Moderate, okay. Great. So, how is the mains prep going? Is it good? Okay. All right, anyways, I'll start with my strategy. So, I'll just start with the timeline. This strategy is mainly about the strategy for 3 months, that is between prelims and mains. What I did between prelims and mains after I cleared mains. So I had approximately 3 months with me nearly, because the exam was somewhere around September mid, and I started preparing specifically for mains 2 days after prelims, I guess, that is from June 1st. So I had approximately 3.5 months. So my rough timeline was as follows. I'll just write my rough timeline. My goal was to complete 3 revisions of mains. So for that, my first revision was between June 1st to July 15th. This was my first revision. My second revision was for July 15th to August 15th. And then the rest was for third revision. So this was my rough timeline that I followed between prelims and mains. I was wanting to complete the revision 3 times so that I'll be confident and all that, and this was the rough timeline. So I had different answer writing strategies for these 3 revision schedules. For the first revision, when I was doing my first revision, I focused mainly on daily answer writing. So why did I opt for daily answer writing and not 3-hour tests or 1.5-hour tests or whatever? That was because this was the phase I felt I need to get into the groove of answer writing, because after you prepare thoroughly for prelims for something like 3 or 4 months, you will lose the habit of writing answers, right? So I had to get into the groove again. So I did not want to jump into 3-hour tests directly. So I wanted to get into the groove of answer writing by slowly working on writing answers and then building structure and content. So here I focused on daily answer writing in this revision phase. And then in this phase, what I did was I was able to address the demand of the questions. I was able to build the structure. I was able to build the content and all such things. But I was not minding my time factor. Time factor is like we have to complete the paper in 3 hours, right? I was not minding it here. I was like just doing answers. Time factor was not in my mind. So after that, during the second revision, I felt that probably this is the time I start focusing on time, like, to complete the paper in time. So this is when I switch it to half-length tests. Half-length tests. So half-length tests were for 1.5 hours. They were for 1.5 hours. And why did not I take up full-length tests again? So why did not I take up full-length test was that I was not yet ready for giving full-length tests is what I felt, since this was my first attempt. I had not given the attempts before. I felt I need to focus more on revisions. Answer writing was also important, but revision is also equally important. So I thought if I start writing full-length tests right from now, maybe my revision gets compromised. So that is when I thought I'll give half-length tests instead of full-length tests. So this what helped, how it helped me was I was able to manage time also. I was seeing if I'm able to complete the answers in 1.5 hours or not. And in that sense, it helped me in, getting that confidence in managing my time. And also it helped me build resilience. Resilience in the sense means, it's completely grueling in the sense that you have to write for three full hours and you have to write so many papers. So a lot of resilience is needed for you to write those many number of papers. So daily answer writing does not test your resilience, because it's just any other answers. You just write 1 or 2 answers and you are at it. But if you want to write something like 10 questions or 15 questions, a great deal amount of resilience is required. And that is how it helped me building the resilience, these half-length tests. And during the third revision, which was approximately for 1 month, I went with full-length tests. So this was obviously to test my speed, if I was going well with my speed, and also to continue going ahead with resilience. So this was basically my timeline and the answer writing strategy pertaining to my revision schedules and the timeline. So I think this kind of helped me in building my answer writing organically and also at the same time manage my time. So this is what I did. And then coming to subject specific, so next is like, I'll come to note making later. Probably I'll go with answer writing first. So 3 things are extremely important for answer writing. They are active reading, framework building, brainstorming and practice. So what is active reading? Active reading is like we obviously read and we try to remember the things that we read. Like, okay, you are reading a piece of material for your mains paper and you try to remember those things. But that is not what active reading means. What I did was I used to read a fact or a stat or an example, and I used to imaginarily think, how can I use that in my answers? So that is what active reading means. Active reading means how you are going to read, how you are going to use what you are reading in your answers. That is what active reading means. How does this help in answer writing? This helps because answer writing is all about that, getting that element of spontaneity in you, and also attending to unknown questions and also bringing all your knowledge onto the paper on that day. How does that happen? It happens through active reading. When you're reading any piece of material, don't just read to remember, but also read to show how you're going to, actually use it in the answers. So for instance, if I can give an example, you're reading something like a festival in art and culture. You're just reading the details and all such things. Don't just passively read them, but try to link how am I going to use it. Okay, you are reading a festival of Northeast India. I will be able to use this particular example when a question is asked in internal security or society about Northeast India. That is, despite immense potential, Northeast India has not been able to so and so. Such question is there. So here, despite immense potential of Northeast India is one part of the question. Here you can actually use that point. Immense potential is you can use how cultural elements like these festivals that Northeast India has, even though it is rich in cultural elements, still Northeast India has not been able to achieve its potential. So something like that. So this applies for each and everything that you study. That is, any stat, any fact, any example, or any point that you're reading, you have to actively link to any each and every part of the syllabus. That helps you in summoning the points easily when you're actually writing the answer in the exam hall. So this, you will not realize its importance when you're doing it, but when in the examination hall you're faced with questions and you're going to write 20 questions, then you'll be able to actually summon the number of points over there. So please try to adopt this active reading. Active reading is not just reading for the sake of remembering, but also reading in the sense that you will be able to, you are analyzing how am I going to use this particular point in the actual exam. You will only imaginarily think of questions and you will only imaginarily use those points in the questions asked. So that is what active reading means. And next is framework building. So what is framework building? And why is it important? So frameworks is that what happens is that the reason why many people score less marks in mains is that it's not because they don't have knowledge, it's not because they have not read sufficiently, it's because they have not built the systematic frameworks for every subject or every topic of the syllabus that they can readily use in examination hall. So what do I mean by framework building? For instance, there is something like a question on disaster management, okay, or handling a disaster. So what happens is that you read a lot of material about handling a disaster. And when suddenly a question is asked in the exam, that is, how do you handle a particular disaster or what measures can be taken, you have so many points, but you are not going to write them in a systematic way, or even if you are going to write them, your points will be repetitive in nature and they're not going to be of, diversity will not be there. So instead, you can develop some kind of framework for this. What is that framework? LRR, that is laws, rules and regulations. What are the laws, rules and regulations that are present to handle that particular disaster? That is one point. Second is institutional. What are the institutional measures that are there to handle that particular disaster? For instance, something related to coastal areas, you can write something like Coastal Zone Management Authority. That is one example of institutional thing. And third you can write is community-oriented measures. That is how community together are handling the disaster. For instance, there is something called Apada Mitra scheme that is there. Those are nothing but they are community-based volunteers who are going to help you in any disaster. So that is one example. And then there is global level efforts. Global level efforts are nothing but how countries together are handling such disasters. For instance, there is something called Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure that India has held. It's nothing but it is basically to kind of handle disaster kind of situation. So that is another example. And the other point you can write is something like technological. For instance, how satellite technology or any kind of supercomputing technology is being utilized to kind of predict disasters. So this is what I call framework. When you are having frameworks like this for every topic of the syllabus, what happens is that it becomes really easy for you to make notes, one, because you can make notes in this format, two, revise easily, because when you are revising, you need not remember each and every point. You can easily revise on these lines. And third is, write answers quickly, because you will be able to recall the points in this order and you need not put much effort into those things. So that is another thing. And also your answers will be diversified. Diversity is very important in answers. So here, no one point is similar to the other. Like you have covered law, legal thing, you have covered institutional aspect, you have covered community aspect, you have covered global level aspect and technological aspect. So this is how you make frameworks for each and every part of the syllabus. This is just an example for disaster management, but that you can do for every part of the syllabus. For instance, something like when you're reading, a spectrum for modern India, there is something called British impact of British on economic impacts of British. Something as basic as that. So when you're reading the whole material, you have to framework it in the sense that, okay, British's economic impact on industries, British's economic impact on agriculture, British's economic impact on services. What does services include? Artisans and everybody. British's economic impact on tribal economy, British's economic impact on food security, British's economic impact on exports and all such things. So when you're reading the piece of material in this way, that is frameworked in this manner, it becomes really easy for you to read, organize your thoughts and put those thoughts onto the paper. So that is what I mean by framework building. People mostly focus on this aspect and this aspect, but people don't do these two aspects a lot. But I feel these two aspects are extremely important because active reading will again help you to come up with points in the examination hall as quickly as possible. And framework building is important for these reasons. That is important. And then obviously brainstorming and practice is non-negotiable. You have to write 3-hour papers, 7 papers, 9 papers in total, including the language papers. And for that, a lot of practice is needed, a lot of brainstorming is needed. And also the papers are like, you have GS1 in the morning, GS2 in the afternoon. A lot of resilience is needed in that sense. You feel like giving up, but you cannot. So in that sense, practice and brainstorming is important. What do I mean by brainstorming? Brainstorming is nothing but I use it to take up topper copies every day. Like all toppers, right from top ranks to all ranks, I use it to take up topper copies that were there in the websites, and then I use it to see the question. After seeing the question, I used to think for myself, okay, what will I write? Just quick points in my mind, and then I use it to check my thoughts with the answer that is given in the paper. In this way, what happens is that unconsciously or subconsciously, you will learn things. You will learn things of like, what is a good answer? Okay, why did this topper score good marks? And how are they substantiating their points? How many examples are they writing? How many points are they writing? All such things. All such things are extremely important, and that is what brainstorming means, and it is an extremely important exercise. Practice is also important, but brainstorming is important for you to order your thoughts again and put these two things into perspective. So that is what the components of answer writing are basically. And apart from that, I also wanted to tell you what are the good, for every paper, GS1, GS2, GS3 or GS4, what happens is that people tend to see all the papers in a similar fashion. Like, okay, all GS papers are the same. Maybe people differentiate ethics a bit, but they see GS1 is same, GS2 is same and GS3 is same. And in fact, within that, people think that, the way you write history answer should be similar to the way you write geography answer or whatever. But in my opinion, that is not the case. Each paper is different, and within that, each subpart or subject is different. So each paper is different. The way you write answers for each paper is different. And within each paper, each subject requires different preparation. So what do I mean by this? Basically, there is something called GS1. In GS1, you have history, art and culture and these subjects. So how do you write a good answer, good history answer, or good art and culture answer? What are the essential elements of a good history answer or art and culture answer? So, in my opinion, for history, what is required is very specific examples. Very specific examples. So, what do I mean by very specific examples? Did you see last year's papers, mains papers? Mains papers, have you seen them? So, do you remember any history questions from last year mains papers? Any question that was asked? The first question probably. It was something like geography and history, interrelation between geography and history was the question. So what I did was, I had to quote very specific examples, right? So in that, what I did was, I quoted something like, in the question, how are history and geography related? I quoted something like coastal areas, how coastal areas impacted the history of that area. And in that, I quoted, obviously, Cholas. But I didn't just quote Cholas, I mentioned the port name, which was nothing but Puhar or Kaveripatnam. So what happens is that people stop at this level. That is, people write coastal areas, people mention about Cholas, but people don't mention the port or something of this very specific nature. Also something like when you're writing something like Jaladurga is another example. What is Jaladurga? Jaladurga was erstwhile capital of Magadhan Empire, Mauryan Empire. So here I mentioned the rivers also. Rivers that formed this particular capital. So what happens is that most people stop at here. They definitely mention coastal areas, they definitely do give the example of Cholas, but they don't give this specific example. Example, the port of Puhar or the port of Kaveripatnam. What happens is that this is what differentiates your answer. Right? You know, this specific example is what is going to differentiate your answer. If you're going to include such specific examples in your history answers, you're definitely going to get, you know, an additional mark or an additional half mark or something in every question. I think this is what has differentiated me, differentiated my answers, my history answers from others. Also, I remember another question in the same year, which was about some kind of technological contribution of Delhi Sultanate. So it was for a 15 marker. So people felt that it was a difficult question. People felt that there was not enough material. But I remember quoting very specific examples again. For instance, I remember quoting Feroz Shah Tughlaq's efforts in building canals. So this I quoted under agricultural technology. So all such things. This is what I mean by specific examples. Specificity is important. When you mention something like Feroz Shah Tughlaq or when you mention something like Puhar, obviously the examiner is going to understand that you have some specific set of knowledge, and that is how it is going to be rewarded in history, at least. That is what I've observed. And then I'll also come to geography. Apart from history, there is geography in paper 1. So geography, there are two sets of questions basically. One is traditional questions. The other is dynamic questions. So what do I mean by traditional questions? Traditional questions are ones that test your conceptual clarity or understanding of the subject. That is it. Example, there are questions like the last year when I've written the paper, there was questions on fjords. And previously there have been questions on air masses and all such things, or something like monsoon. These are very traditional questions. In the sense, you can easily, read them from any book, build some conceptual clarity and then write an answer on it. Like you can take up something like, you can take up something like Gocheng Liang or something like BMFIS or even NCRTs. You can read these concepts and you can replicate them in the exam. So that is what traditional questions means. They don't test your, complete holistic understanding or anything. You just have to read them and you have to replicate them. But there are something like dynamic questions. These are increasing in geography this year. What do you mean by dynamic questions? They have something like environmental aspect attached to them, right? For instance, questions related to climate change, like how climate change impacts food security, or all such things. These are what I call the dynamic questions. What do I call the dynamic questions? Because these are happening. These concepts are happening. Something like climate change is in the news, and then they are asking, they're linking it to various topics. How does climate change impact food security, or how does climate change impact something like water bodies and all such things. So this is what I call dynamic aspects, and for this you need a lot of value addition. So value addition in the sense you can collect specific examples, or you can collect specific facts from multiple sources. Like you can take them from newspapers, you can take them from magazines like Down to Earth, you can take them from Topper Notes, or you can take them from current affairs compilations. So in geography, what happens is that while traditional questions can be dealt by somebody who has thoroughly read their geography concepts or thoroughly read a book, dynamic questions are going to be the decider. So for that, value addition becomes extremely important, and like I mentioned, these are the sources from where you can collect value addition for geography dynamic kind of questions. So this is something pertaining to geography, and then I'll come to society in paper 1. So society, what I feel is like terminology becomes extremely important. You have to use society specific terminology. So what do I mean by society specific terminology? I'll just give you some examples of the words or terminology, you will understand. First is like socialization, to start off with a basic term. So when you're writing something like a society question, instead of using the term parenting, use the term socialization. That is a society specific term. These are the kind of terms you have to use. Second is identity crisis. Another example, another term. Third is intersectionality of vulnerabilities. So like this, you know, these are the society specific terms that I meant to say. I think I've written some of them also. I'll just try to put them over here. Broken window syndrome. So you will you need to look for these terms in newspapers and Topper copies and Topper Notes. You will find these terms. And all such things. So in society, terminology is the first key aspect of writing a good society answer. You cannot write society like any other answer. You cannot substitute the term, socialization with parenting. Socialization has to be socialization. And when you're writing something like intersectionality of vulnerabilities, that is also extremely important. So first key aspect is terminologies. And the second thing I would say is, well, again, examples, though I'm quoting it everywhere, examples are extremely important. And what examples? What happens is that we tend to usually use examples that everybody use. For instance, when there is a question on regionalism, everybody quotes Khalistan issue as an example, right? But that is a very basic thing that everybody does. How do you differentiate your answer from what others are writing? So you quote very specific examples. In this, what you can quote is something like demands for inclusion of languages in 8th schedule is also something manifestation of regionalism. Demands for inclusion of languages in 8th schedule. So this is just one example of how you are going to differentiate your answer. Everybody writes examples, but don't write the same examples that are obvious. Khalistan issue is a very obvious example of regionalism that everybody is going to include. You have to differentiate your answer from everybody, and for that you have to write some different example or specific example and a very new example. This is something that you've been reading in newspapers, I guess, demands for inclusion of Tulu language in 8th schedule and all such things. This is very dynamic example also. This has been in use since a long time, but this one is a new example. So these kind of things make your society answers a little different. One is terminology, definitely, and second is examples. Within examples, you have to be very specific about the kind of examples you're using, not the examples that everybody uses, but very dynamic and very new examples that the examiner might appreciate. So that is other thing. And next, this is about paper 1, GS paper 1. If you have any questions specific to GS paper 1, probably we can take them up now.
Is there any particular pages?
Pages from where you take the value addition or something like that?
How many pages you have to write? Is there any particular pages like only 1 or 2 pages? Something.
Okay, I mean they give you the fixed format, right? For 10 markers you have to write for 2 pages. For 15 markers they give you 3 pages. No, you in the booklet that is provided to you, they have a fixed space. 10 marker question is for 2 pages. 15 marker question is for 3 pages. So that is the number of pages you have to write. So that is there. That they have given you. You don't have any choice to increase the question, increase the pages or anything. They have given you. They have given you a fixed format, fixed pages. So that is there. Any other thing?
Is mapping helpful for writing answers of geography?
Yeah, mapping is definitely important in geography, but I don't think you have to do it purposefully, right? You know, even if the question is not demanding just because it's a geography question, you need not incorporate maps for every question. You have to see where the maps are extremely important. For instance, last year there was a question on something like natural vegetation of India, I guess. Natural vegetation of India. This was a question where map was definitely needed. You cannot show all the different kinds of vegetation that are present in India without a map. So I definitely used a map. So it is up to you. See where the maps are extremely required. If they are extremely important, you have to incorporate them. Otherwise, content is always the king in mains. Even if you are not substantiating your answers with diagrams and maps, you will be rewarded. I didn't use many maps or many diagrams. I was sticking to my content, and where it was extremely essential, I used it. So that was there.
How many frameworks can you do that?
Okay, so
For the dynamic part.
okay. Frameworks is basically, it's about, you have to identify the topics where you can prepare frameworks for. For instance, there is something like climate change and water bodies is a favorite issue of UPSC. Like, how does climate change impact water bodies? For that, I had a framework in mind. Water bodies include how does climate change impact cryosphere? That is one part. Second is how does climate change impact ocean currents? That is second point you can write. Third is how does climate change impact groundwater? How does climate change impact glaciers? How does climate change impact overall hydrological cycle? So these things. So this is how I prepared a framework, and it was for, I used to look at the previous year papers and I used to get an idea on what questions can be probably asked. This was one area I prepared. And then something on climate change and agriculture is also another favorite area of UPSC. Something like climate change and food security is another favorite area. So I used to take up 4 or 5 main issues, and then I used to prepare frameworks like this. So that is how it worked. Any other questions? So let's move to GS2. So GS2, obviously the first part is polity. So definitely polity means you all know that articles and constitutional amendments become non-negotiable. So articles and constitutional amendments. So how did I do this? Everybody knows that articles and CAs are important and everybody reads them and they kind of remember them. But what happens is that when you go into the examination hall, you kind of forget. That is there. And what happens is that last time there was a question in GS2, it was about NALSA. NALSA means free legal aid. So one obvious thing everybody quotes was NALSA as part of Directive Principles of State Policy. That everybody writes. But what many people didn't write was, right to free legal aid is also part of Article 21. That is right to life. When you open Lakshmikant and you see the list of rights that have been given under Article 21, you will also find right to free legal aid. many people will definitely write to free legal aid as part of directive principles of state policy, but not many will write it as part of Article 21. This is where the difference comes up. When the examiner sees that you have also included right to free legal aid as part of Article 21, he will understand that you have some sense of deeper understanding. This is very basic. This is right from Lakshmikant, but not many people will remember it, or people, will not be able to reproduce it. So this is how you have to become extremely thorough with articles and CAs. It's not just cursory reading, or it's not just remembering few of the details, but it's about thoroughly understanding each of them and applying them in the exam-like environment. That is extremely important. And second is definitely statements given by famous personalities can be used as conclusions or intros. For instance, Indianization of judiciary was a term that was given by some Chief Justice, former Chief Justice. Like, you might have read it in newspapers. And then you have to note these things down. Like when somebody, a prominent personality, is giving a statement, somebody like CJIs or somebody like commissioners of constitutional bodies are given statements, you have to note them down, and then you have to use them appropriately when the question is asked. Like for instance, many election commissioners, chief election commissioners give you statements. You have to note them down, and whenever a question comes on election commission or problems related to election commission, you can use it. So that is what I did. Whenever any prominent personality gave it, I used it to take them up from newspapers, and I used to note them down, and I used it to quote them. That is extremely important because it gives credibility. If you are writing just another statement without quoting the person who has actually given it, I feel it gives more credibility if you are quoting the original person who has given that, and if you are you are writing a question on judiciary, and if you are quoting CJI, that is the best way to gain credibility, right? I mean, that is a very good way to end the answer also. So that is something very important. And next is, I'll go to international relations. So again, another area where frameworks become important is in international relations. Framework is definitely very easy, like bilateral relations or multilateral bodies. You will have something like political relations, you will have economic relations. Within economic relations, you have something like trade, you have something like investments, and you can have something like cultural relations. You can have something like people-to-people relations. You can have even technological relations. You have strategic relations. You have security relations, defense relations. You can also write something like cooperation on multilateral organizations. Etc. So this is a standard way for you to prepare all your notes for international relations between any countries or even for multilateral organizations. Another important thing in international relations is that you have to update your notes constantly. So you might take up a topper notes and you might see that you have all this content already, and then you will just read it, or you kind of incorporate it into your notes. But that is not going to give you marks, because you have to update your content constantly, because international relations is a dynamic subject. So whenever India-US relations is there, gone are the days you are going to quote something like trade wars, or not trade wars, but trade deficits or problems on the front of trade, etc. You have to quote something on the lines of cooperation on 5G, cooperation on critical minerals, cooperation on supply chains, etc. These are the elements that are coming up these days, right? You are listening them in newspapers these days. When you are not updating your notes that is already in this framework with these points, it is not going to give you marks. So it's extremely important that you constantly update your notes with these specificities. So always ensure that when you are making already, if you have notes already for international relations, that is good. You have a set notes in a framework, and then you just have to update the frameworks with recent happenings. That is extremely important. Another thing that is extremely important for international relations is the terms. Just like society, international relations also requires usage of terms. So what do I mean by terms? Again, you have to use something like net security provider. You have to have the India's foreign policy for different regions on tips. Something like something like Act East is a very basic thing, and something like Central Asian Connect is also there for Central Asian regions. That is the second part. And third is something like Gujarat Doctrine for the neighborhood. Something like Sagar Policy for the maritime security. Something like Mausam for again maritime thing. So India's foreign policy have to be in tips. Whenever a question is asked on something like neighborhood, you have to definitely mention Gujarat Doctrine. If you're not mentioning Gujarat Doctrine, I feel the answer is incomplete. So terms are extremely important for international relations, just like security. So whenever you are encountering such terms, do collect them, keep them handy and revise them properly so that you can use them in your answers. Something like Global South, you listen a lot. That is there. Something like NATOization. NATOization was used in the context of many members, European members getting admitted into NATO again. So this is another term that was there in the news. De-Americanization is another term. What is de-Americanization? It is the term basically to show the declining global power status of USA. So that is another term. And then something like G0. G0 is also used. What is G0? You know, G7, G20, also all such things, right? Because of the declining credibility of multilateral organizations, G0 is a term that is coming up wherein countries are reluctant to cooperate on multilateral grounds. So that is another example. So these are kind of terms I'm telling to use it in international relations because they definitely give you an edge. These are again basic things, but you will forget them to use them in the examination hall under exam pressure conditions. So you have to have them on your tips, revise them constantly. That is important. And then apart from that, there is governance in paper 2. So governance, what happens is that governance is a very easy topic. You will find governance notes from anywhere like e-governance, citizens charters, or something like social audit. This is a very easy topic. But how do you differentiate your answers from others? That is important again. So here what happens is that case studies and best practices are important. Case studies and best practices. So you need to collect best practices for each of the sections mentioned in the syllabus. For instance, something on e-governance, you have to collect a case study showing how e-governance was adopted in a particular organization or something on these lines. For every topic, if you collect such case studies, you can use them handily whenever a question is asked. Apart from that, another thing that is important is organicity in your answers. So what do I mean by organicity? So many times what happens is that your answers tend to become technical in governance. When you're reading something like e-governance, you read up material on e-governance and you quote the solutions that are already there about e-governance from the material. So this is the technological problem with respect to adoption of e-governance and you'll use it. But that is not how I did it. I did it in a very organic way. I stood in the legs of administrator. If I was an administrator in an organization where e-governance adoption was a challenge, what would I do? So if I thought from that perspective, my solutions were very natural. They were not copied from somewhere or they were not very technical. They were not something that didn't have any practical relevance. So this is extremely important. That is, keep your answers very natural in governance because ultimately governance is nothing but what you would do after once you get into administration. So for that, instead of taking up solutions from the notes or books or just copy pasting them, it's important that you yourself think from the point of view of an administrator and then come up with very natural organic solutions. That is important. It doesn't take much effort. You just have to think and then come up with organic solutions. That is what I did for governance in that sense. And this is it for GS2. Any specific questions? Social issues. Social issues, okay. What I did was, so I again prepared notes for each vulnerable section. Whether it is children, whether it is disabled, whether it is minority communities, whether it is caste groups that are suppressed or any such things, I prepared notes. Again, the notes included all such things like, for instance, demographic parameter, that is how much of the population they constituted. And then I also included something on the lines of their problems. Within problems, you need to have a framework. That is, what were the historical problems? What are the political problems? Political problems in the sense, some of the, obviously, they don't have enough political representation. They are politically suppressed. They don't have enough social capital to form political groups. So this is what you will write. And then you will have economic problems. Economic problems in the sense, you can write something on the lines of labor force participation rate, something on the lines of they sticking to traditional occupations like agriculture or something, and they not having enough representation and other economic activities. That is something. And you can also write something like discriminatory practices towards them. That you can also write as a problem. And then in the problems, you can also quote something like probably access to justice and other such things. Access to justice, resources, and other such things. That is how they are marginalized. So that is another problem. So when you're preparing problems, prepare in this framework. You need to have a framework for every problem that you're writing. So that is important. And then you'll write the solutions. Here in solutions, it's again extremely important to quote the committee reports or something like that. For instance, there is something called Sachar Committee, Ranganath Mishra Committee, Jaya Jaitly Committee, like who proposed increasing the age of marriage for women. So that you can quote in women's section. So and all such things. These committees are extremely important. You have to note them down separately because you think you will remember them, but it's extremely difficult to get them out in the exam-like environment. So you kind of have to write them separately and revise them continuously. So that is another thing. And then you can also include a page on what are the government efforts that have been done and what more can be done. That is way forward. So this is what I did for vulnerable sections when it comes to social issues. And apart from that, most of this social issues gets overlapped into your GS1 society aspect, where you will do something like poverty, hunger, and all such things. So this overlap, I think it's better you read social issues in, when you're reading society part. That gives you more holistic perspective instead of dealing with it in a separate way. So that is how I dealt social issues. And any other question? Sources I referred, okay. Sources for social issues was basically, I had Topper's notes. I think I remember doing it from Dhatri Reddy ma'am notes that I referred. So this was one source, and apart from that, I referred Topper's notes only, mostly Shruti Sharma ma'am's notes. And I took value addition from newspapers and current affairs compilations. So this was what I did for social issues, notes.
Natural solution, does it applicable to only for governance?
I mean, you can do it for any section also, but I feel governance is something that has to be natural. In the sense, what do I mean by natural? Natural is practically applicable. So once you go into the administration, you are not going to replicate the solutions that are in the textbook if they are not, practically worth it. So I'm telling it in this case specifically because, governance case specifically because that is important in that case. It's not like you cannot do it for other sections like society or anything. But for governance, that is something that is mandatory is what I feel. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah, so then we'll go to GS3. So GS3 first is definitely economy. So GS3 is one subject I feel is content dense in the sense that you have to include a lot of figures, stats, lot of possibly if graphs are there, graphs are also good enough. So GS3 as a paper is completely content dense. GS1, GS2 you can do a bit of analysis and everything, but GS3 is something that requires a lot of content. So in that sense, you have to always keep an eye on stats, figures, and every such things. That is extremely important, and you have to use them liberally. Like wherever, even for substantiating your points, you have to use them. Like for instance, I remember last year there was a question on something like land reforms. So I remember quoting SCCC data on what percentage of lands are marginal, what percentage of lands are small, which sections held how much of land and all such things. So this kind of data is very important and you have to use the data very liberally. So that is there. And apart from that, another important topic in economy is agriculture. So at least 3 to 4 questions are coming from agriculture every year, and the questions are also becoming dynamic. Dynamic in the sense they're asking something like technological impact, so and so technological impact, like what is the impact of nanotechnology or what is the impact of e-technology on agriculture or something like that. For this again you need to have framework ready. Framework in the sense, if you are preparing a notes on something like technological impact of e-technological impact on agriculture, you have to prepare like what is the impact of e-technology on factors of production. That is, one factor of production is land. Second factor of production is labor. Third factor of production is capital. And then you have to also include how e-technology helps in marketing, how e-technology helps in food processing, how e-technology helps in waste management, how e-technology helps in price discovery for farmers, how e-technology helps consumers also, and all such things. So this is what I mean by framework. So whenever you are reading something like this, you have to have this framework ready and you have to include all the points and all the examples. It is extremely important to substantiate these points with examples. So if you have these frameworks ready, that is going to be helpful. So in case of agriculture, your entire notes and your entire framework has to be supply chain like. From farm to fork. What are all the steps involved? Like whether it is factors of production, whether it is cold storage facilities, whether it is grading facilities, whether it is marketing facilities, whether it is reaching it to customers, whether it is food processing, and all such things. This is the supply chain I'm talking about. So whenever you're making any topic notes for agriculture, this is the supply chain thing you have to follow. And your answers also should reflect the supply chain so that they appear again diversified and you can easily be able to generate the points. So that is extremely important. And apart from that, so there is also something like disaster management. Disaster management, I think I already told you what is the case in the beginning of this session, how it is, how you are going to make frameworks and all such things. And another thing is environment. So environment is also there. Environment, in my opinion, you need to have a wide reading because you are getting some unconventional questions and it is possible that you might not be able to, like you know, for instance, they are asking disasters like mention some recent dam failures that have happened, all such things. You know, they are asking some random kind of questions. For this, you know, to have a kind of wider reading, what I did was I took mains 365 compilations of previous 2 years and I made my environment notes from that only. Because environment questions, you know, they are like a continuum. What do I mean by continuum? The issues are happening since 2 to 3 years. It's not like the issue, for instance, there is something like dam failures. That is an issue that has been happening for the past 2 to 3 years. You cannot not read the topic just because it was happening something like 2 to 3 years back. Even if the topic has happened 2 to 3 years back, it is still relevant because some or the other way the incident is happening again or the ramifications are still felt or something like that. So the questions are in a kind of continuum where for 2 to 3 years issues are extremely important. So you better take some kind of compilation for past 2 years or 3 years and prepare your notes out of it so that even if any unconventional question comes up in environment, you will be able to handle them. That is extremely important. And seeing this year's papers, I think your prelims environment knowledge is also helpful in your mains because they have asked questions on Ramsar sites, they have asked questions on protected areas, national parks and all such things which we usually do read for prelims and we forget the details. But they have asked it in mains also in 15 marker questions and all such things. So having an eye on your prelims notes for mains when it comes to environment is also important because you can use that knowledge as examples or you can also use them in dealing with unconventional questions that may be asked once in a while every year. So that is there. And apart from that, there is science and technology. So science and technology was one area that I was not really comfortable with because the questions you may also get some vague questions in science and technology. Like there was a question on blue LEDs few years back, which was out of the blue. So all such things were there. So, but what can you do for science and technology is that take up every technology, take up biotechnology, and then a holistic notes has to be there, or holistic framework has to be there. What do you all include in biotechnology? You can include something like all such things, something related to gene editing, something related to genome sequencing, something related to stem cells, something related to vaccines. This comes under biotechnological impacts on health, its applications in health, but it also has its implications in agriculture. It also has its implications in defense. Bioterrorism, right? Bioterrorism, where that is there. So that is also there. And it also has its implications in other fields. So do this for every technology, whether it is biotechnology, nanotechnology, robotics, something like upcoming technologies like supercomputing, all such things. Take up each technology, do their applications for every field. And when you're doing the applications, segregate them properly. That is biological, defense, agriculture, etc. Within this also you can make a framework. Biological. One is disease detection. Second is treatment. Third is prevention. So all such things. So that is how you make your notes. When you make your notes like this, it's easy for you to revise and also bring up diverse points, like I said. So this is how you can make your science and tech questions. And another important area in science and tech is that they are asking questions of recent nature. Like for instance, there was a question on Chandrayaan-3 last year, because that was obviously there in the news. So it's important for you to go into the details. So if Chandrayaan-3 is there, not just a cursory reading, but you have to go into the details of payloads and all such things that are there in the mission. So if anything comes up like this year, or if anything has been happening, you have to have a detailed understanding of that thing, because a direct 15 marker is expected. It has been the case since last 3-4 years. There was something on MOM asked in something like 2014 or 15 a mains paper, and they asked about Chandrayaan-3. They asked about vaccines during the COVID year, very detailed question on vaccines. And they asked about e-vehicles also. E-vehicles are in the news, they are asking about that also. So whatever is happening in the news, you have to go into the details of it, not just a cursory reading, but go a lot into the details. Then you'll be able to handle such questions that are being asked. So this is about science and technology. Any specific questions for GS3? Oh, yeah, internal security is there. So internal security. Internal security, as far as I remember, I did it wholly from a book written by two senior IPS officers. I don't remember their names, but you can check it on Google. That is a very good book, which has a crisp, all internal security issues are detailedly explained in that. You can refer to that book. And again, in internal security, when you're making your notes, it's extremely important that you have the framework set. Any internal security challenge, left-wing extremism, terrorism, organized crime, any of such things, you need to have a framework. That is, what is legal framework, institutional measures, technological measures, community-based approach, governmental approach. Within governmental approach, you will have different approaches. That is law and order approach, developmental approach, perception management approach, you can also include global efforts. For instance, money laundering, you have to mention FATF organization, that is there, and regional groupings. For instance, there is something called a regional anti-terrorist structure under SCO, Shanghai Cooperation Organization for Terrorism. So regional efforts you can mention. So this is how you need to prepare your notes or have a framework for every internal security challenge in the paper. And within that you can have, like like I said, this is extremely important. Governmental approach, law and order approach, like what are the law and order measures that government is taking to tackle something like left-wing extremism. What are the developmental approaches? Developmental approaches can be anything like developing social infrastructure, developing physical infrastructure, building social capital, and then perception management. So what is perception management? Perception management is usually you have the people who are suffering these internal security challenges will have a negative attitude towards the government. Like whenever security forces enter the region, they have a negative attitude, but the government has to manage the perception of the people that it is for their good that they are here. So and all such things. So this year also there was a question directly from this aspect of the paper, that is winning the hearts and minds of people of Jammu and Kashmir. There was a question the year I wrote, hearts and minds of people of J&K. This was directly about perception management. So when you have the notes prepared like this, it's easy for you to do it. And also it's extremely important that you pay special attention to probably technological measures, because this is becoming a favorite area for UPSC again. They're asking how different technologies can be used to something like to curb or to do something like money laundering, all such things. So this part is becoming a favorite area, so you can kind of prepare extensively on it. Within this technology you can have again frameworks, right? Space technology, how can space technology be utilized to tackle challenges, and how can something like cryptography can be used, something like darknet and dark web are used, all such things. So when you're paying attention, when you're making notes or reading, pay attention to these aspects, whether you're covering all of these things. If you're reading something like technology, go into the details, what kind of technologies. If you're doing government efforts, go into the details of what all different kind of government efforts. So this is extremely important for internal security and society. Knowledge is also helpful for you to write internal security answers, because a lot of it is overlapping. Because regionalism, communalism, all such things have basis, are somewhere related to internal security challenges. So you can use your society examples in internal security also, and update your knowledge, update your knowledge constantly. For instance, when you're quoting something on internal security challenge in Northeast India, it's important that you quote recent examples, like, Bodo Agreement, all such things, rather than quoting some very old frameworks. So this is extremely important when you're doing for internal security, and maps can be utilized in internal security actually. That is a good area where you can utilize maps properly. And when you're dealing something related to drug trafficking, you can definitely show golden crescent and golden triangle on map. That is extremely important. So all such things. So also one more thing you can do in internal security is case studies. Like for each challenge, there are numerous good case studies that you can quote. For instance, left-wing extremism, there is something called greyhounds that everybody probably might have heard, greyhounds. So all such things. For every internal security challenge, you can think about a case study, you can collect a case study and you can use it. That is the way how you can differentiate or probably give depth to your answers. So that is about internal security. Yeah. Any other questions? Economy, like I said, again, topper notes were something, Datri Reddy ma'am notes, Rishikesh Reddy sir notes, all such things. And monthly magazines, yearly compilations, newspapers, these were the things that were, it was mostly similar for every subject. Mostly topper copies, 2 or 3 topper notes, and then current affairs for every subject. So, that is it, or anything else? Okay, then probably ethics. I'll just do ethics also. So ethics I scored 136, and I'll just point out few reasons why I might have scored 136, which is one of the highest this year. So one of the reasons is usage of terms. It is not easy to use terms. You have to be thorough with usage of terms. When you're writing something on women's issues in ethics, you have to use the term sensitization. You have to use terms like persuasion. You have to use something like role modeling. You have to use terms like social capital, or something like conformity bias and all such things. So you have to have a list of terms that you can use. So what happens is that in GS you use a particular term, but in ethics you use a completely different term, which is kind of ethically oriented, right? So for instance, in GS you can use terms like influence, but the ethics paper, the counterpart that you can use is persuasion or nudging. So be mindful when you are using the terms in ethics. This is the term you are using in your GS papers, other GS papers, but when you're using the same kind of point in ethics, you are going to use these terms, that is persuasion and nudging. So you have to collect such terms. You can use it, you can take it from topper notes. There are many topper notes that provide you with these terms. So read and revise them properly so that you are going to use them. And apart from that, I think syllabus becomes extremely important in ethics, because whenever I was writing my answers in ethics, I used to link my points to syllabus pointers. So for instance, whenever there was a question asked on probity, something like that, I used to link probity to all the other aspects of syllabus. Something like, how does probity impact transparency? How does probity impact accountability? How does probity impact emotional intelligence? How does probity impact good governance and all such things? These are the service delivery, etc. These are the terms that are mentioned in the syllabus. But when we are writing a question on probity, we tend to forget that these are the terms mentioned in the syllabus and we write random points. But instead, if you link all of your points to syllabus pointers, what happens is that it will be easy for you to generate points. Second is that you will write diverse points and your answers look systematized. And you will reflect the terms, obviously, transparency, accountability, everything is reflected, and the examiner feels that you have covered everything. So that is extremely important for writing theory answers in in ethics. Apart from that, there are case studies. For case studies, I believe what is extremely important is that you use your general studies knowledge in case studies. For instance, when something is asked about consumer fraud or something like that has happened, you just don't write the points you know, but you also have to include your GS knowledge. Like you have to mention something like Consumer Protection Act. You have to mention terms from Consumer Protection Act, all such things. If you use your general studies knowledge like this in your case studies, it becomes more content dense. That is what I feel. If you're writing something on women's, women issues, you are writing laws. Laws have to be enforced. This is not the way you are going to write it. You have to mention specific points from GS, like prevention of sexual harassment at workplace, POSH Act 2013. These are the things that you have to include so that it gives specificity to your answers, and the examiner will also understand that, okay, she's very well integrated the GS knowledge with here. So whenever you are writing case studies, remember that you always use your GS knowledge as much as possible in your case studies. And theory, like I mentioned, these are the two important points. And apart from that, in case studies, I stuck to the point. Like people write stakeholders and all such things, but I didn't do that. I just wrote what was asked in the question to save my time also, and also to give more weightage to what has been asked, rather than beating around the bush. So not many people do that, but I did that because I had time completion issues with ethics. So I stuck to what has been asked only and didn't include anything extra. Stakeholders, if not asked, I didn't include. Only if they were asked, I had included them. So that is the case with the ethics. Yeah. Essay. Okay. So ethics is done. Essay is basically, okay. So it's definitely a difficult thing to come up with a strategy for essay, because the variation in marks is huge. People are getting 90s, people are getting 140s also. So this huge difference, I was going through many toppers' copies and their marks respectively. And then I came to some kind of idea about what might be working for people who are scoring high and what might not be working for people who are scoring less. So that is, one is the essays that are being given are definitely, yes, philosophical, and they are asking us to be argumentative when we are writing philosophical essays or any essays, in fact. So a usual way or a usual method people adopt when writing essays is the pestle approach. That is, they are given a topic, they will write about political impact, economic impact, or social impact, or impact on environment and all such things. This pestle approach is something they adopt. But what I did was I made my essay argumentative. What do you mean by argumentative? Argumentative is like you have to open up many dimensions of the essay. For instance, last year there was a question called "Not all those who wander are lost." So what people might have written is that they might have written something like what does this statement mean in political sphere? What does this statement mean in economic sphere? What does this statement mean in legal sphere and all such things? But I didn't approach the question like this. I made it more argumentative. What did I do was, I started it with an anecdote, definitely. Apart from that, I firstly introduced the terms wandering and lost. What do you mean by wandering? What do you mean by lost? There are different meanings. For instance, geographically, wandering means just going from point A to point B. Spiritually, wandering is different. Some other sense, wandering is different. Lost is also different. For somebody, lost is not conforming to social norms. For another person, lost is getting a failure. For another person, lost is not able to put efforts. For another person, there are different connotations of what does wandering mean, what does lost mean. So first, I try to introduce it with an anecdote, and then I opened philosophical exposition of the terms given. That is wandering and lost. So that the examiner will understand till what level I went into deciphering the topic. So I might have given whatever. I have included all kinds of things in wandering. I've included all kinds of things in lost. What does lost mean in various ways? What does wandering means in various ways? This is how I did. And then I went to the main topic, that is, not all those who wander are lost, definitely. Not all those who wander are lost. Here, yes, definitely I gave examples from all spheres. I gave historical examples and all such things, but I didn't write like historically, politically, economically. That is not what I've written. I just changed the paragraphs, that is it. But I gave examples from diverse fields. After that, I have introduced another argument telling that mindless wandering is a recipe for disaster. Mindless wandering is a recipe for disaster. So yes, I'm agreeing with the examiner that not all those wander are lost, but I'm also giving an antithesis. Antithesis is telling the opposite view, stating that mindless wandering definitely leads to disasters. And that is where I gave the opposite of what I told. But mind it, this is what is the essay topic. This you need to give a major portion. This you just have to include it in a page or something like that. You cannot overdo this because that is not what has been asked. This is what has been asked. So this, and after that I gave something like suggestions, like mindful wandering. How can you achieve mindful wandering, right? So here, suggestions are not like just any other general studies suggestions. You have to be philosophical also, here also. Or, you can bring your knowledge of ethics over here. Like you can use something like conformity bias and all such things. You can bring in all such concepts and you can tell how mindful wandering can be achieved. So, this is what I mean by argumentative. Argumentative is like you have to open up the dimensions of the essay. You cannot write your essay in a linear fashion, that is, not all those wander are lost. What is its significance in political sphere, economic sphere, legal sphere? That is outdated. This is what do you mean by argumentative. And this argumentative you have to build up. You have to take a topic and you have to brainstorm what are all the ways you can bring up such arguments. And then apart from that, what is important is that you maintain the flow. It's not like you're just stitching up the pieces of the essay. You have to maintain the flow. That is important. And you can use lots of quotations. You can use summaries of books you have read, which has helped me in my case. I used to read a lot of fiction and non-fiction books, so I had summaries of these books and I quoted those ideas while writing essays. So those ideas will lend a bit of credibility and will help you in substantiating your point, right? So that is extremely important, and they can also help you in writing anecdotes, good anecdotes. So apart from that, your general studies knowledge is important, but essays require practice and brainstorming because this is not easy to achieve, right? This particular argumentative tone, setting up an argumentative tone is not easy to achieve. For that you have to practice or brainstorm. You can take a previous year questions and you can brainstorm that things. Yeah, that is about it. Any other questions regarding anything?
What's your daily study?
Okay, this 3 months specifically, I had 5 hours given for anthropology, my optional, and 5 hours given for general studies. And during the nights, I practiced a bit of answer writing, and I also did my current affairs. So it was somewhere around 12 to 13 hours. So 5 hours for optional, 5 hours for general studies, and 2 to 3 hours for current affairs and answer writing.
By reading current affairs, will you study newspaper or any daily compilation like any other websites?
Okay, so definitely I read newspaper. Apart from that, I use it to follow one daily compilation where I use it to add value addition points. Like if I find any good example or a fact or any such things, I used to add them into my notes. And apart from that, I also taken one current affairs course from one of the coaching centers, which was helpful. They used to give current affairs in a PDF format, because current affairs also, like, it is two things. Current affairs is two things. One is issues, second is fodder. This I think I saw it from one of the toppers, Vikram Grewal sir. What is issues? Issues is these topics can be directly asked as questions. Like for instance, I mentioned something about Chandrayaan 3. Chandrayaan 3 is a topic that can be directly asked as a question in Science and Technology paper, or something like GST Amendment Act was there, which was asked as a direct question in one of the papers. So these are issues. Issues means you have to prepare them thoroughly in depth, pros, cons, negatives, positives, etc. That is important for you. And rest is fodder. Fodder is what? Fodder is examples, fodder is stats, fodder is all such things. Fodder is basically value addition that you'll use in your answers. So when you're making your CA notes also, clearly differentiate between whether it is an issue or a fodder. Not every current affairs material is an issue, not every current affairs material is a fodder. So if an issue has the potential to be directly asked as a question in itself, you have to make a detailed notes for it. The pros, the cons, everything, like one-pager notes. And then if an issue or some like an article doesn't have any particular significance, but it can be used as an example or as a fact, you have to note it down separately so that you will use them in any of the papers or any of the questions as examples. So that is how it used to be. Sources for ethics and essay, the same thing. I mean, ethics, like I said, it was again from toppers notes only. I remember doing Datri Reddy ma'am's notes only again. Apart from that, I think I also referred many toppers notes for examples specifically, because ethics is all about examples. You need to quote a lot of examples. So I referred, at least you can open Telegram channels and you can find a lot of toppers notes. So that is how I collected examples, and no specific resource as such. It's just topper notes, but it's just about how you're organizing your notes and how you're coming up with it. And for essay, like I said, it was my GS knowledge only. Apart from that, there was one topper called Vasant Dabolkar sir who had good notes made for essay. Vasant Dabolkar, age 76 of 2022, I guess, 76 rank. So I collected his essay notes. Apart from that, I also, like I said, I had read some of the books. So I collected summaries of those books and I used them as ideas in my essays. That is it. After how many readings have I written my notes? I think I first made my notes and then I read. I first made my notes because I studied in a group. So we kind of divided our work, we kind of made notes, and then we had our sources segregated, and then we made notes from all the sources combined, and then we started reading. That is how I did notes. Short notes, obviously, I did it later. Short notes is something that you'll use just before the day of exam or few days before the exam. That I did after something like 2 revisions. After then, I did short notes. Any other questions?
So there are 25 questions and we have to attend them in 3 hours.
20 questions.
Yeah, 20 questions. So how did you manage, like, how did you get an idea? What time did you take to think and what time did you take to think?
No, it's like everybody knows that in mains you don't have time to think, right? You have to do your revision so properly that you will not think at all. So I don't think I took any time to think at all. Just when I read the question, I started writing because there's no time to think.
Okay, so using proper revision, we don't need that much time.
Yeah. So I'll also do a bit of anthropology. How many of you are taking up anthropology as an optional? Many of them. Okay.
How we choose anthropology as an option. We are really confident that what we are for our option.
Okay. I choose anthropology because one is anthropology is not dynamic as an optional. For something like political science or something like that, you have to constantly update your notes. Anthropology doesn't have that headache in the sense that you can make your notes and you can add a bit of value addition here and there, but you need not regularly update your notes. So that is one of the advantages of anthropology as an optional. And second thing was, obviously I was interested in physical anthropology, also the genetics and all, because in paper 1, physical anthropology has a lot of space taken. So if you are not comfortable with physical anthropology aspects, whether it is genetics or archaeology, in fact, or fossils, it's going to be difficult for you. So if you're comfortable reading those topics, you can go ahead with anthropology. And apart from that, the practical reasons, there is a lot of material available. The topper notes are really good. The topper copies are also there. And there is no dearth of material only, and there is enough guidance also. Test series are also good. So that is also one of the reasons I took anthropology. Yeah. So yeah, I'll just do a basic, I'll just tell a basic strategy of anthropology. So anthropology, what I did was, anthropology, I feel the better your notes, the better your answers will be. So it's all about notes in anthropology, because the questions are also becoming very dynamic these days, very difficult these days, because many people are taking up anthropology as an optional. So gone are the days where the questions are directly from the syllabus or something like that. They're giving bit of analytical and twisted questions. So for that, what is important is that you kind of, take up a lot of topper notes or any kind of sources, and you make a notes. One is the basic notes you have. Basic notes is like you will take up a topic and you'll prepare a basic version of the notes for every topic mentioned in the syllabus. And then comes value addition. Value addition becomes extremely important for you to differentiate your answers from others. Value addition, you can again use it from any of the toppers notes that are available. So do ensure that first basic answer, making of notes is done, and then a lot of value addition is done to the notes already there. And the second thing that is important for anthropology is revision. Like for other optionals, answer writing might be important. I'm not telling anthropology doesn't require extensive answer writing, but more than answer writing, revision is important for anthropology, because it is a subject that has a lot to remember. You need to remember a lot of things, whether it is in physical anthropology or archaeology or even tribal anthropology. So the more you revise, the better it is. So unless you are not revising and you're just jumping into answer writing, that is not going to work. But if you do a lot of revision, and even if you are writing very less number of tests, that is still fine. But don't directly jump into answer writing without properly revising. That is not going to happen. And third is interlinking. Interlinking in anthropology. Only with good revisions can interlinking comes. Like, you have to link paper 1 topics with paper 2. Vice versa, paper 2 topics with paper 1. You have to use case studies of tribal anthropology and socio-cultural anthropology. You have to use concepts of socio-cultural anthropology and tribal anthropology. And for that to happen, you have to revise a lot, right? So the more you revise, the better you'll be able to form these interconnections. So that is again extremely important. So do focus on revisions more and less, even if you are giving less time for answer writing, that is still fine. But revisions are non-negotiable. You are going to forget things in anthropology very quickly. So this is one thing that I want to tell in anthropology. Apart from that, what is important is that short notes is also important for some topics in anthropology. For instance, there is archaeology. Archaeology is a topic where you can get confused easily. For instance, there is something like Paleolithic, Mesolithic, Chalcolithic, Iron Age, Bronze Age, all such things. So there are numerous sites that you have to remember at the global level, at the India level, and all such things. What happens is that you will get confused. So instead of that, you can make short notes. What does the short notes include? You will include a table, and you will write Paleolithic here. You will write type of tool. You will write tool technology. You will write the sites. You will write sites at the global level. You will write the sites at the India level. And you will also write socio-cultural characteristics and all such things. So do this for all periods, 6 to 7 periods that are there, and do short notes in the form of a table. So this is all you have to revise for archaeology, right? So this is what you have to do. Archaeology on the face of it appears difficult, but if you, reduce it to this level, that is making a table including all subheadings and all ages in this manner, and you just have to revise this table once and for all, it becomes easy for you to replicate. This is how short notes is used for archaeology specifically. And apart from that, even short notes can be made for tribal anthropology. There are numerous case studies in tribal anthropology. You have to write them down in one place and read and revise them continuously so that you can use them in paper 1 also. Because it's all about interlinking. Like I said, you can use them in paper 1 also, and within what happens is that tribal anthropology, the diverse the case studies, the better. So it's not like when you are reading a case study in tribal displacement, you are using the example only, case study only there. It's not like that. You can use that example in other areas also. You can use that for tribal problems in general also. So it's important that you write down the case studies together in one place and continuously revise them so that you can use them in multiple places. So you'll not be dearth of case studies, I would say, in that sense. So this is basically a strategy, very basic strategy for anthropology. I'm not going into details because I've not been a high scorer of anthropology this year. I've just got 275. People have even scored 320. So, but this is the basic strategy. Rest, I think there are better topper talks and channels for this. There is Mandar Patki sir, who has scored really good marks in anthropology. There is Narayan Amit sir, I think ranks 70 in one of the years. So he also has got good notes. And for physical anthropology, you can refer to Apala Mishra ma'am's notes. She also has written really good notes. And apart from that, EPG Patashala material is one material that can help you in doing notes for anthropology, because many questions are directly coming from that material. So you can read up that EPG Patashala material. So yeah, this is a basic strategy of anthropology. I'm not extending it because I think maybe there are better strategies available out there than mine.
About sociology? About sociology.
Like my optional is not sociology, so I'm not a better person to tell it all. Yeah. Any other questions? Any? Value add in anthropology. So one thing is definitely you have a lot of topper copies, topper notes. Like I said, there are numerous topper notes that have been uploaded, especially for anthropology. So from there, what happens is that once you make your basic notes, you just have to run through the topper notes, just skim through them. And if some point is missing in your notes, or some point you find nice but it is missing in your notes, you just have to add it up somewhere. That is one way of making value addition. And second thing is there are Telegram channels that are giving value addition from current affairs point of view also for anthropology. Not a lot like other subjects. For political science, which is completely dynamic, you have to follow current affairs a lot. But there are Telegram channels that are providing you current affairs for anthropology, which can also act as a value addition. So follow those channels. You can pick 1 or 2 articles daily from newspapers, and then that you can use as value addition for anthropology. Apart from that, I think you can follow some of the channels if you wish. Like there are YouTube channels especially about primates, fossils. These are the topics in physical anthropology. There are continuously updates about. For instance, something like Neanderthals is their topic. One of the persons has received Nobel Prize in one of the years. So this is the thing that you have to do, right? So this is where you can get value addition from. Yeah. Any other questions?
Regarding mains, any doubts you can ask. Some of you might not understand few things differently. One reason is maybe she spoke fast, but definitely it's very valuable session for those who are writing mains this year. And you can ask, specifically for scoring more in the mains, whatever she said about each paper, related to that you may ask questions. Otherwise, you can leave it here. You can leave it otherwise. Any more questions? No, right? Okay. Then actually it's a very valuable session.
Thank
I
you.
heard some of it.
Okay.
Valuable session. And friends, see, if you observe specifically for the mains, topper's notes is useful because I'll take the mic.
Yes, sir. Sure.
Have some water. Friends, basically for the mains, what happens is, before write the mains, you should have a concise notes having all important points. That if you have to make the notes from all topics, all subjects, difficult for the mains. Hence, it's always better to take some toppers notes, not only the toppers of what Ananya Reddy said just now, any other toppers also last 4 years who made their notes, you can take their notes because that will be crisp, to the point, and you can directly get wisdom from there. Means you can choose the toppers notes which you understand, not exactly what she said, which you understand, some toppers notes. For example, Dhat Reddy madam notes, she understood better. There are other toppers also who wrote on ethics, anthropology, which you may understand better. Do in that way. And for those who could not understand some of the points she told just now, I feel at least you understood the broad idea of how to approach the mains. That broad idea, slowly as you are reading, next few months, slowly that comes back to you. Whatever you heard now, you may not be able to digest some of them immediately, but as you keep reading, slowly you understand the points. They'll come back. Okay, she told that one. Okay, she said that any topic just divide into 6-7 main points. Address any issue in these dimensions, or use the keywords, or use the syllabus words. Simply doing like that will help you score more. Okay, Rania, then we'll end it here. Okay, I think you haven't touched any of these things, right? Okay then. Take care, friends. We'll meet again.